Hello.
Hi, Loie.
Hi. Can you
How's
hear
it?
me okay?
Yes. That is a
Great.
badass room you're in.
Do you like it? I
I'm
thought
so
I thought
Joe.
I thought you might appreciate it. This is Ben's at home music studio. It's tiny. It's like it's not tiny, but it's probably, two closet size isolation booth where he can record and do lessons and stuff. But it's just in our garage. So I'm totally walled off, and hopefully the sound will be way better than anything outside right
Yeah, it
now.
sounds all right to me.
Okay.
I'm looking at the levels here. Yeah, I assumed it would be a little better since he is a musician. Uh, I was like, oh, I hope that this is better than what I've been getting as of late. um,
Well, I would imagine it's hard with people like in their house, echoes and whatnot. I know my office is not great, but of course, in all the planning that I put together to talk with you, it's MLK Day, and my kids aren't even in school after all that.
oh, that's
So
right.
they're running
Yeah.
around. They're running around the house right now. So that's why I'm in here. But it is better. But let me know if there's anything I can do to help you. I'll
Yeah, no,
try.
it sounds good. Um, I never know what the holiday is until I look at Twitter in the mornings. That's it's just the
You're
truth.
one up on me. I mean, I'm teaching college courses right now, and I still didn't know that it was a holiday. So I have I have no excuse. But just a testament to the crazy times, I guess.
Are you zooming in for your courses?
Yeah.
And this
Yeah,
is
I haven't taught college in, well, 3 years. I guess it's been 3 years since I left University of Colorado. But my mentor there contacted me because they're all remote this spring. He needed adjunct professors essentially to fill classes. So in some ways, the pandemic has brought me more work, which is
I
really
found that's the
backwards.
case for like a lot of creative people in New York City as well. For some reason, the pandemic has worked out for those who just kind of stayed with looking for either creative or academic pursuits, just because
Yeah,
so many people are dropping off the radar.
it's true. It's my other main job is working for a nonprofit here in Nashville, and it's teaching creative writing courses that's always been in person for the last 3 years, and we had no digital platform before March of of 2020, and so we scrambled, as an organization to move everything online. I had never heard of Zoom. I mean, I was like way off the charts with my technology, and then we pulled it together and got some great funding, and an NEA grant and the like, and so I've been doing remote Zoom stuff since March. But because of that, we've been able to ramp up our programming, so doing more classes and reaching people across the country, and I think something like 12 other countries now, where people are zooming in to a Nashville nonprofit arts organization that never would have found us before. So silver linings, are there if we look hard enough, I guess. How are
Yeah,
you
and
doing?
actually, I'm doing good. I'm gonna ask you more about your academic stuff after I do an intro to you, but
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like I don't know if you ever read this author. He's a French author. He was kind of a douchebag, so a lot of people avoid him. Um, but his name is Louis Ferdinand Céline. He's the main inspiration for like Bukowski and all those guys. Um,
Okay.
he did a book called Journey to the End of the Night where he talks about how he wishes Paris would just stop. He wishes
Ah,
society would stop so he could catch his breath. That kind
okay.
of idea. And I always felt like over the past 15, 20 years that I wish things would just kind of stop for a moment so I could get my bearings. And this year, everything stopped, unfortunately, in a very bad way, but I used it anyway. And I wrote my ass off last spring.
Oh,
I
good.
I wrote a 400-page first draft of a screenplay set on Casco Bay. This thing's been stewing for I probably since I was in high school, where and at a certain point, like when you think about something long enough and you have the time, I just I had no excuse. I had to do it. And then I also wrote a bunch of other stuff, mostly about growing up, different mediums. And then in July, I made a film with some people who were willing to, and I've been working on that. So, you know, I took the opportunity to be productive, and
Yeah.
of course the podcast as well.
No, and that alone would be enough of an achievement to my mind. I mean, you have so many episodes. I was very impressed because at least my creative productivity has been way down. You know, like work ramped up, right? And I'm doing all this creative mentorship and stuff, which is great. But my writing all but stopped, and the work that I was progressing on. But in part because kids, you know, kids 24/7 couldn't get out of the house to work, which is usually my what I can do, you know. But to see people continuing to create and even ramping stuff up and getting things done and crossed off their list is really exciting for me, because I feel like at least with a lot of the writers I know and have talked to, we've been struggling, you know, to focus long enough to like complete a real sentence and make it feel good. And
Well, I could tell you, like, ever since like November 7th, I've not been able to write a single thing. I think it depends on like the severity of what's going on in the news, because I'm also like hooked to current events. Um, and I'm also like, I have a New Englander's view of the United States, and so I'm very sensitive to everything that's happening right now,
yeah, right.
as you can well understand.
I do understand it, or I'm trying to understand that side of myself more and more the older I get. I think I pushed it away. I think I pushed it away in my New York years, and I was just like, I'm done. That's gone. And then, yeah, doing the MFA and having to actually create fiction, wanting to actually create fiction, then I find myself sourcing, you know, Casco Bay and Cliff Island and myself more than I ever had before. And then, you know, here I am creating work that I actually am proud of for the first time. So shame on me for pushing it away for so long, I think.
Yeah, that's something that I also I went back to school in my mid 30s, and I did a BA, and then I did an MFA as well,
Dang.
also in writing. And it's one of those things where everything I didn't want to write about ended up being the best stuff to write about.
Right.
Just is what it is.
Isn't that it's not fair?
Yeah, it's so let me just give it an intro, because listeners are gonna pick up on the fact that we know each other.
I know, right?
So
However many years it's been. Like 10 years.
2009. 2009.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's crazy.
So everybody, I have here Loie Rawding, formerly Loie Merritt. Though I think that Loie's such a rare name, you could probably publish under Loie and just claim it for yourself. I've never
Right,
met
just
another
Loie. I'm a one name persona.
Yeah.
Well, it might have to be that way because I changed my name to my mother's maiden name midstream. So I have sort of two working names. It will slowly transition, I think, just to Loie Rawding. But yeah, Loie
Yeah.
would be fun too. Like,
So
see ya, you know, I'll just be Loie.
just to contextualize, so a lot of the listeners out there, you all know I grew up on an island off the coast of Maine, which I am very open about the fact that I couldn't stand it. I always call it the desolate rock, and but there were other islands. Legend has it, 365 islands in the same bay. That has since been debunked, but one of the neighboring islands is a much more beautiful island called Cliff Island, and this was where Loie grew up, and we met because we would take the same ferry service commuting to school. That's basically it. And there wasn't a lot of exchanges up until you moved to New York, and then we reconnected. And I'm like, well, why don't you be in some of my films? I really needed people to be in my films.
I know you. Come with me.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, somebody in New York I actually know.
Yeah.
And so that was basically it. And then we didn't talk for a little over 10 years. And then you published this book, Tight Little Vocal Cords. And the moment I saw that I could pre-order it, I did. Anytime I find out that I know somebody who's producing work and putting it out there, I'm an immediate supporter. So back in the day when you put this out, I was an early adopter of Soul Trouble, which I think what was it, an undergrad capstone project of sorts?
It was an honors college thesis project, which I refused to just submit a paper on boring old 8.5 by 11. I had to go and self-publish a short story collection, which is embarrassing now. I don't even know
I see that as badass. I think that's like an indicator of somebody who has a vision for what their life is going to be. Because when I went to school, I it was all about conforming to the guidelines and all right, exactly what am I turning in? What is the space? What is the font? And it's just like the best professors were the ones who were like, surprise me.
Yeah,
those are the ones I got along with.
Yep. So. And I had some good ones, probably earlier than a lot of people. I had just a couple who said, I don't know, just do whatever you need to. That when that term necessary came into play really early on for me, like do what you feel is necessary. And it's something that I still teach now is whatever is justifiably necessary for you and your craft, give it to me and be prepared to prove it. And it's something that I borrowed from early days at Pace. That was, so that Soul Trouble came out of my time at Pace University in New York.
What is, when you're not in a pandemic, what does your creative process look like? Well, how would you describe it?
That's a very good question. I'm, as a writer, and this is tricky, right? Because I know you as a film director, and when we worked together, I was pursuing acting. So my creative process kind of still starts in my theater brain a little bit, and my early education studying theater, performance, dance. And so when I first engage with an idea for writing, I start almost with physicality, with building a character as I would as a performer. I still default to that, whether I want to or not. So often my ideas begin with this sort of embodied experience that I have, my senses firing off and going back to a memory that I had from earlier on in my life, or, absorbing a character, either film or television or literature, that then shoots me off in my own direction is sort of where ideas are coming from right now. And then I write by hand. I'm kind of old school in that way, I guess, where my first draft of anything is completely written by hand, in a journal or whatever, legal pad, the full thing. And then part of that is I'm really miserable at revision still, even after sort of all these years of writing and drafting different forms. I can't stand revision, and I don't think I'm very good at it. So when I handwrite something in this like really miserable handwriting that's really tiny and difficult for even me to read, when I go back to transcribe it onto the computer, I have to sort of translate myself to a certain degree. And it's this forced revision time where I'm looking at my handwriting thinking, okay, this is what I think it says, but this is actually what I meant. And so I'm re-upping the scene, right? Or I'm improving the story or character in ways that I might not otherwise think of if I was just typing into the computer, which is great and I think a lot of people do it that way, which is fine. But for me, I get that extra step of revision. And so then, input into the computer and sort of go from there.
Yeah, I remember when I did my MFA at Sarah Lawrence College. There was a lot of talk, especially between the people who were published and the people who weren't, about the different way the brain fires, the way the neurons fire if you're writing versus typing.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're alluding to that a little bit, which I also understand and relate to, because I find that if I'm just out there making notes into my email, because I'll often email myself a lot of different notes. Um, they're not as accessible down the road as if I were to have like a little Moleskine journal and kind of taking stuff down that way. I know there's something about the physical media process that just kind of, I don't know. I don't know how it hacks the brain, but it does.
Well, I think too, when I'm writing fiction, especially, it also puts me immediately in that sensory world, because I'm connecting my body to language, to that cognitive side of writing, but I'm physically enacting it, right? With my hand, I have to move in different ways to get comfortable, to make the handwriting legible if possible. And so for me, being that sort of embodied actor first and then writer, I find that from the get, I'm accessing sort of more detailed, more fully fleshed out scenes right off the bat, you know, in my first draft, almost to a fault, where I have these overly sort of sensorial scenes where the biggest feedback I usually get is like, you need to scale back here. Like you need to simplify, which, you know, I ignored largely for tight little vocal cords because I refuse. But there's a sort of lushness to writing by hand, I think, that's accessing, you're accessing both sides of your brain in that way. And so I will continue to do it. And then I guess I do a little storyboarding, and I thought of you yesterday because I was looking at my wall with this new project I'm working on, and it's a total storyboard, what I imagine filmmakers, you know, do, and little note cards with handwritten, you know, brief descriptions of scenes stacked up and ordered, and then I will thumbtack move as I rework what is this current manuscript I'm working on. So that's another part of my process that I stole from another art form, and I find really helpful.
Yeah, well, you know, I find that a multitude of art forms tend to affect me. Like um, literature, for example, doesn't inspire me to want to write. It inspires me to want to work in either mixed media or to develop visual projects, whereas visual oriented media will inspire me to want to write. It's super weird and reversed.
That's interesting.
So I always
I
like to say
appreciate
that
that.
if you want to create, digest all mediums and see what
Exactly.
sticks, because you never know. And one of the things I regret early on is I rejected so many mediums that ended up becoming really helpful to me creatively. So like I disrespected the graphic novel straight up. Now I'm obsessed with the graphic novel. And also just like general mixed media art, I just had no interest in, and I wish I had. I wish I had developed that taste in culture, and because once I started going to like gallery openings and really seeing what other people were doing, my work shifted completely.
Mm.
Um,
Isn't
so
that cool?
how much of your process is integrated into your coursework? So like if you're like designing a syllabus or a plan for like a semester, how much is your process affecting what you're doing?
I encourage my students to at least try my creative process. And what I've found across all ages, so teaching college age students all the way up through sort of retirement age at this point, I find that the handwriting component, especially, people groan about. Like, I don't want to do that. Why should I have to do that? And sort of saying like, it doesn't have to work for you, but just try it. And what does it feel like to push yourself out of the boundaries of your comfort zone when it comes to creating? How does that change your work? and it might not be better, it might be worse, but at least then you know that um, that you're accessing different ways of thinking. So I tend to start every class with like, this is how I work. This is what works for me. And we're going to, over the course of the class, do a little bit of everything. So bring the journal. When I say handwrite, handwrite. When I say go to the computer, let's switch mediums. And then often what I do, we're talking about this multi-art form stuff. Like, I'm usually driven by image first, and then character, plot, setting, time comes later. But I start with an image, 9 times out of 10. And so like with tight little vocal chords, I discovered this Maine artist, Marsden Hartley, who's a modernist painter at the turn of the 20th century. And I discovered his artwork and his story, his biography at the same time, and connected with both for different reasons. But what I decided to do when I first started writing out scenes that would become this novel, is I would look at a piece of his art and I would try to translate it into language rather than sort of describing a painting with language. I tried to turn the painting into language, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense.
And so I found that this is how I want to work. This is what works for me. And so with my classes, I'll bring in artwork, I'll bring in pieces of music. I'll say, let's listen to this. And how does this change the scene that you wrote last week? Rewrite the scene, right? But write it while we're listening to this music. What happens? And why do you think that happens? And I find that students are really pushed to access parts of themselves that they didn't give themselves permission to access before, and sort of broadens their scope of like, what do you do when you don't feel like writing? And what do you, and this is really important, or has been since the pandemic began in March, but like, what do we do with ourselves as artists when we're stuck? When we can't get words on the page, when we're miserable, and then become more miserable because we can't create. Or at least for me, that's what happens, is it just gets worse if I can't push myself to create something. And so here's your toolbox, where you can listen to a piece of music. You can look at, now you can tour galleries and art museums in ways that you never could before. Go to the Louvre, or go to the African American History Museum, and do a tour and see what sparks you in that way. And it might be crap, and that's okay. Like, I kind of encourage the cultivation of crap right along with the pearls that you come up with in this exploration. And it's as much for me as it is for my students, I think, as I sort of teach in ways that I need to be taught every day of my practice too.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, it's reminding me of one of the things that I felt like wasn't being tackled in not only my MFA program, but also when I went to film school. And that's kind of like this idea of taking control of one's emotional intelligence so they can create and not be blocked by external factors. And that's something that I don't know if you ever heard of him. His name is Stephen Pressfield.
No.
He's an author, and he writes a lot of books kind of for creative people. So he wrote a book called The War of Art, which I'm obsessed with. I've been wanting to interview him about it.
Yeah.
And like, whenever somebody says that I want to do creative, I want to be a creative, I want to pursue the art life, or something like that, I tell them to read The War of Art. And I think this should be like standard, like art life 101, writing, film, painting, whatever your medium, because there's a lot of advice about kind of what to expect, and kind of how to manage sort of the mental state in terms of like being able to stay productive, stay focused on the things that matter. And I think if that was more a bigger part of, if emotional intelligence growth was a bigger part of art programs in general, I think that we'd see a lot more productive people and a lot more successful people.
Yeah, and I think happier people, or at
Oh
least
yeah.
people who are content. And it's something that I see a lot as a teacher is a frustration, of like, I have these ideas, or I have this draft, help me turn it into what I want it to be. But ultimately that's not my job. That's the student, that's the writer's job to turn it into what you want it to be. And the hardest thing that I probably have to repeat myself every class, is, well, how do I do it? How do I turn this into what I envision in my head? And the answer is always write it. Like, like it's not some magical thing. And I don't have the wand to make it so. You just have to write it. And as a creative mentor too, so I do these mentorships where I'll work one-on-one with artists, and mostly writers, but some visual artists as well, who are feeling stuck. But it's like they want to be handed the time, the energy, the emotional capacity to get this stuff down on paper. And if you're waiting for that moment to strike you, then you're going to be waiting forever, is what I had to realize for myself as well. And so to say like, well, I might be exhausted today, and I might be really bogged down with external forces, the political climate, my economic situation, I have to go back to work in 6 hours or whatever it may be. So I'm just going to get something down. I'm just going to get something down and see what comes of it. And at least then you're working with some material, like more often than not, I have people come to me and they haven't even written it yet. They're just like, I have this idea. So like, how do I sell it to an agent? Right. And the answer is like, you have nothing to sell. So you have to write it and then come back to me, and I will do my best to help you create what you want in the end. But there's just always this never ending struggle of like, this is what I want, but I have not created it yet.
You know what I think it is? Because I saw that a lot too, when I was not only in my undergrad, in my graduate course, but I also see it's kind of in the real world, and I've thought about it a lot. And here's what I think it is, and I could be wrong. I think that there are people who think that there's a fear that the idea is better than what the execution will be, and they want to keep the idea pure, and they don't want to execute it if there's a risk of destroying this idea.
Then it doesn't exist. That's the part that, and I'm just as guilty of it. Less now than when I was still in my MFA and really working out these kinks of my craft. But like, so nobody achieves anything without actually creating something. And at least, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I saw this a lot in New York, and it's not why I left, but within creative communities, I saw a lot of, I'm a writer, I'm an artist, but there's no oeuvre, there's no portfolio there. And we all had a million excuses of why we didn't have that portfolio. Well, I'm working 12-hour days. I have no money. I have no time. So many excuses, which are all legitimate. And I don't mean to make those illegitimate in any way. But for me, you don't get to be an artist unless you have the art.
Yeah.
Unless you've created it. And so for me, and I only spent 5 years in New York, and I was like, you have way surpassed me in that regard, and I miss it. But anyway, I found I had to start making a life for myself that would allow me to actually produce the art that would make me an artist. And so for me, that meant leaving such a big city where economically I was pressured into not being able to create. where it was sort of actively saying you can't create because you have to do something else to survive. So that's where I was at. And then, you know, moving out to Colorado, a totally different atmosphere than where we grew up, below sea level, you know, suddenly I'm like 6,000 feet in the sky, and you know, the clouds look different, everything's different in the high desert. And by changing my environment so drastically, I was forced to then almost turn into myself and say, okay, where is my creative process? And now I have this air with which to create. And so I started creating. And then I finally felt like, okay, now I can call myself an artist. Now I can call myself a writer because I actually have the pages. And it could be garbage, right? Like that never gets published, that nobody likes. And that still might be the case but maybe not, you know, maybe I reached that one person, or maybe that one person who's trying to be an artist says, I didn't know you could do it this way. Yeah. But if you can, if I can help give one person permission to create in the ways that they need to, then I'm successful as an artist. Like that's where I am right now.
I'm like, preach, because this is what I've been trying to tell people. It's like, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. It's about creating a regular practice for the self.
Right.
I mean, that's really it. That's what it sounds like you're saying to me. And that's yes. kind of what the conclusion I came to as well. And, you know, as bad as it is in New York with people who are artists, but not, it's worse in LA. So,
look at me. I didn't go out there. I'm in Nashville, Eric.
Well, Nashville seems like, you know, a productive place. I don't know if it's productive for writers, but it's certainly on the map for creators.
Well, so this speaks to, I think, what I was just saying. You know, so my family is comprised of a working touring musician and a working teaching writer. Okay, so that my partner and I, that's what we do. And so from Colorado, where we had this almost respite from the big city, I got my MFA. An MFA, by the way, which not only accepted experimentation, but encouraged it. You know, a faculty that said, we are going to cultivate your own voice, not what we think it should be, or, you know, to follow certain codes or parameters for a literary community that doesn't speak to you, but what are you doing and what do you want to create? And so that's where I came from, you know, academically, as someone saying, again, just prove it, be able to prove it, and I'll accept this as your work, as your art. But anyway, so we did that time, and it was like, we're ready to move on, but we're definitely not doing LA. Like that, yeah. And because it's a very different, I think, creative energy out there, with its pluses and, for me, more minuses. But the solution was a small city, big town, which is Nashville. What's really cool about this place, and why it works for me as a writer, is that the way that the city is expanding with, you know, migrations out of the major cities in this country and people seeking more affordable housing and more stable employment in their chosen fields, we end up in places like Nashville, like Raleigh, North Carolina. You know, there are other hotspots. I shouldn't say hotspots. That has a totally different meaning now, but you know what I mean. There are places that people are flocking to, Nashville being one of them. One benefit of that is the finance that is going into all of the arts. So like Nashville said, we're a music city. We've got music on lockdown. But if we want to draw people here, we need to start funding the other arts. And so the money that was coming in with these migrations started getting funneled into arts programs and grants and funding for writing, visual art, dance. And so you have this sort of like petri dish of like the best kind of bacteria just breeding and expanding, and by and large funding to help support that mission. So like you end up with the Porch Writers Collective, which is where I work. And we're able to provide programming across many different communities and ages and the like. And Oz Arts is another sort of multimedia, multi-platform, sort of like BAM almost. It's like my BAM that we have in Nashville, and it's been around, I think, since 2013. But bringing different kinds of voices to a community that has not had access to them in the past. And that's why it's really exciting to be here right now, and why we chose Nashville. It's not perfect, but I don't know, the older we get, we realize there's no perfect place. So just like suck it up and make it work, you know? Yeah. It's hard with my New England stoicism and my, you know, northeast coast grumpiness and sarcasm. People down here are like, what did you say? Like, or better yet, I can't tell you how many times I get, I've never met someone from Maine, which I'm like, we're small, but we're not that small, you know? Like,
I think we rarely leave. So many people don't leave. We're rare Mainers. Yeah, I mean, I see Nashville as a perspective. I mean, it's not even up and coming. It's pretty much getting there, and you know, it could be enhanced a little bit if this state of Tennessee wasn't so anchored as a red state. But well, the metro area is at least blue, and it's historically blue. I think you're represented by Jim Cooper, which is
yeah. And he's okay. Although I think that as a democratic socialist myself, you know, he's okay. He's fine. Unfortunately, since he came to office, we've had nothing but shit, which is not his fault, but like just perspective, you know, the first week of March, we were slammed by a tornado in Metro Nashville, a tornado that literally went by my house. I mean, like a block away was totally leveled. And we got very lucky with pretty minimal exterior damage, but like the windows of my kid's bedroom blew out, just smashed right as I was going upstairs to get them and bring them down to a closet, because like I know what to do in a tornado, you know. And so that's what sort of kicked off Jim Cooper's you know, presence as mayor. And then 10 days later we were on lockdown because of COVID. And here we are, you know.
Well, I think the true test is definitely going to come starting this week.
Right.
And then we can really see what they wanted to do or what they didn't want to do. Like everybody that was elected this year.
You know, and it's a very anxious time, and I feel that anxiety, not just from myself, but from students, especially of all ages, but that we're all sort of vibrating with this unease constantly, and we all have our breaking points. And you know, for me, and this is detrimental to my art, well, like you swing back to the art, but I tend to freeze and just like and sort of paralyze myself as a survival mode. And I think a lot of people have hit this point of like, well, I can't feel anymore, so I'm gonna not feel as much as possible. And that I've had to actively try to break that every day in order to be an effective educator and someday a writer again. What's weird about living in a southern state is that you're forced, even in Nashville, which is a blue city and a liberal city, and has been for a long time, you are constantly in close contact with different points of view. Yeah. And you don't, whether you want to be or not. And even in the more gentrified neighborhoods like the one that we moved into, but you're sort of in this little negotiation where you have interactions with people, less so now, and it's easier when you can't see your whole face, but you sort of you're eyeing each other, you know, like, where do you stand? and what can I say versus what's not worth my energy at this moment. And that negotiation has taught me a lot about conflict and character desires, and how we negotiate each other in a shared space. And so for me, it's been a very, well, not very positive, but it's been a positive education being forced to exist in a community with a huge spectrum of political opinions. And it was one reason why I was like, okay, well, hell, let's see what Nashville is like, because at least then I'm not yelling at people who agree with me. Like, at least we're yelling at each other and we're actually disagreeing, instead of yelling at someone who's yelling the same thing back at you. And you know, it's kept me honest. It's kept me honest, and it's really clarified how I feel, I think, if that makes sense, or it's ongoing. But I you know, I hope that we all get through this week safely, first and foremost, and then start to piece what is so broken, start to piece it back together. That's
me too.
all I can hope for this week.
Yeah, and
Too much to ask? I don't know.
no, and you know, one of the things I've tried to, you know, I think I'm really good at destroying creation block or writer's block. And one of the advice I always give to people who are kind of having a hard time hunkering down because of all these factors is, I say, look at it like a protest. One of the things I did over the last 4 years was every move I made was a protest against all this stuff I disagreed with. So if you look at the art life itself as a protest, and the simple act of buying a paintbrush is a protest, the simple act of buying a tube of paint is a protest, and then almost that helps me at least light a fire to keep going. And if that's, of course, if the creative is hindered by the current political climate. If you look at it as a protest in and of itself, that I don't know if it would help.
No, I'm on to you. I'm curious about, for you, do you find the political climate and the social climate, does it sneak into your work too much, almost on a topical level? Oh, yeah. Like, this is what I struggle with is it, you know, I'm haunted in moments like this. Not that this is the first time I've ever been in this moment, but it's very hard for me to get out of the topical and to say, I'm going to write something that's not in a moment of political crisis, pandemic, lockdown, you know, parenthood under pressure, or whatever it may be for me. But like, I'm struggling. I find when I try to write about this time in this moment, which is all that I can think about, that I'm the least pleased with that work. Yeah. I really just don't like it. And so the challenge for me has been like, how can I take these emotional states and these more concepts of what's going on and apply it to not this moment? And one writer who's kind of helped me, and I'm not like, I've never been into sci-fi or fantasy. I mean, I enjoy it, but I've never been a reader of it per se. But I got into several months ago now, N.K. Jemisin, the Broken Earth trilogy, which really just sort of really helped me. Like, as a writer, and it not only did I find her writing and her plots fascinating and layered and complicated in the best ways, but it was showing me, you know, different techniques, different ways to approach the feeling of this moment without writing, you know, about this government or this insurrection, or and that my way as an artist is to take these emotional states and apply them to my own version. That I don't work well in the moment of our times. Does that, I feel maybe you're different. I feel like maybe you're better at this, but
no, actually, I can't stand writing timely or creating timely material.
Okay.
I have a fear of being dated because so much of what I've created has been dated that I'm trying to avoid it. But I will use overall social anxiety. So
Yeah.
one of the things, one of the components of the film that I'm currently editing that I shot in July is a big commentary on the process of applying for and maybe getting a job interview.
Okay.
And so um, this is something that I will be timely, but it'll also be timely again and again and again, right?
Yeah.
Because we're
Yeah.
always going to be in a recession at some point.
Right.
And so,
Great.
but what I decided to do was do it in a way where it's not so preachy. I think that's a big part of it is, and so one of the things I did was I said, okay, well, how does applying for work make me feel? And what I came up with was a black hole. So whenever this main character is applying for work, a black hole opens up in his apartment and a piece of his soul is inserted. And
Okay.
then he never hears back. And that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Right.
eventually, though, and this is the important part, the black hole starts to take over his creative life. And it grows out of control and it takes over his space like a cancer. And I mean, it's really just acrylic and shards of raw canvas. And it just kind of grows throughout his space.
Okay.
And
Cool.
it's timely, but at the same time, I could see it kind of outlasting this era.
Right. Yeah. That's what I'm, yeah, that's what I think I'm reaching for now in my work, and maybe have always been. And like with tight little vocal cords, you know, it's this sort of historical piece in the sense that the language is modernist, you know, classically modernist, and in an effort to continue that conversation with Marsden Hartley's work, but also, you know, I placed it in between sort of World War conflicts. Nothing has a name, nothing has a date, but there is this sense of, you know, sort of early 1900s. There are trains, there are boats. You don't see a ton of cars. You certainly don't see our time as it exists now. But as I was writing it, the way I was envisioning these characters was me, was us, was now moving through space. And what sort of became clear to me, and maybe this is an effect of growing up in a place that is sort of stuck in time, you know, and Long Island less so. Long Island is très moderne compared to Cliff Island, but you know, the dirt roads that we rammed around as kids, the golf carts that we drive, you know, the elderly community that really takes over, and you're just this one little girl in my case, you know, literally the only girl in my generation for a time, and that I grew up in this space that was antiquated, and that was my truth, that it was, you know, that it was the year 2000, but that the character I'm writing in this sort of historical book is actually my truth too. And isn't it cool, reader, that this can exist now as it did then? And then really understanding that modernism as a movement is still relevant to this moment, where we're trying to grapple with how fast technology is moving, with how fast industry is moving, the lack of control that we have as individuals. How do we turn that into art concepts that that help us and that inspire us and that inform our existence? Like, that's what modernism was then, and that's where we find ourselves now. So I continue to try to find ways to, you know, just sort of re-envision in some ways the emotional state that is now, or a historical moment, in order to create a narrative that feels really its most true to me.
You know, I wish you had been a peer of mine in my studies because we would have destroyed the debates. You know, we would have teamed up and destroyed those debates.
Man, me too. I wish I had been there too. It sounds like it.
I You experiment a lot with different forms. So you have some parts of your book are in the form of verse. Some of it, I would even say, is essay-like in terms of like you even have this this part where it's almost like the narrator extracts their own thoughts and cites their own thoughts in a way, in a way that like maybe an MLA formatted essay would. I'm looking at page 98.
Oh, I brought it just so
Oh, wonderful.
because I don't have, yeah.
I've always, and I noticed this on
Oh,
Soul
yeah.
Trouble as well, is you're very open-ended, and each section may or may not take on a different format, a different literary medium in terms of how it's presented. And I was wondering if you talk about that and how you decide
Yeah.
what will look, because I'm really obviously interested in how text looks on the page. I'm obsessed with it. I've always been obsessed with it.
Yeah, and it's the visual artist in you, right? And I think it's the visual artist in me as well, trying to play with this blank white space as one would a canvas, you know, as one would set a scene for your camera. And in the case of this book, a lot of it started, I had never written anything this long. I had no intention of writing a novel. It began as my thesis for my MFA. And I had a fantastic mentor who demanded page count of me. And even though MFAs, as far as they go, you know, you're not required to finish your book, right? You have to come up with a certain amount of work, and that can be your thesis or whatever. I can't stand that, by the way. I think we all should be forced to create a start to finish something. But anyway, it's because what I walked away from that program was my book, was my debut novel, you know, and I see so many writers, especially fiction writers, who struggle to get to that first book because they weren't pushed when they were paying to be pushed. Does that like,
Yeah.
So I had this great mentor who said, you will give me these page counts and we will get as close as we can to a finished product. For me to do that meant writing in these little vignettes, because I'm easily distracted. I am also a poet, and think, right, beginning with image, I think more like a poet. I think that's how my brain operates. And so the way that I was able to access this idea of like, oh shit, I'm going to write a novel. Okay, this is how I'm going to do it. And it's going to be little vignettes. And then what sort of came out of the mind of my main character, this M by name, is that they were similar to me in parts of my life, but they were dealing with a sort of mental health situation where their points of view were slippery for themselves. So this character is constantly at battle with himself to understand what is his reality versus what are the voices that he's hearing in his head. What are these people that he's manifesting in his mind versus who is he in physical presence with in a scene. And so to kind of convey that, what made sense to me was these multiple forms. So you have these, like, it's prose blocks, and then you have these sort of dialogues, almost script, right? Like film script almost, sections where he's having these conversations, and I demand of the reader, and it's a lot of effort. I ask a lot of the reader. I ask them to think for themselves and decide, is this a real conversation or is this a conversation that's happening in his head? And try to always write with clarity, because you can't sacrifice clarity for experimentation, but really putting a lot of pressure on the reader to think actively as they read. So in that sense, I was never after a commercial reading. This is very, in some ways, high art, which I still don't like, because I always want my work to be accessible to everybody. And I think it is, but it's demanding. And so then there are these poems, right, which sort of became a chorus, you know, almost like a Greek chorus, speaking to the experience that the main character was going through, as voyeurs, as a, you know, in the case of the novel, more as like a cabaret chorus, kind of standing behind him and lifting him up or throwing him down. And it just, a lot of people didn't like it. It went to a lot of publishers. And it went to several agents as I was seeking representation. And it's not that they didn't like it, it's just they didn't know what it was. They're like, what do I do with this? What do I call this? You know, is it a novel? Well, it's pretty short. It's not you know, and so I refuse labels in the sense that this is what it is. So don't ask me to define it under terms that I actually don't agree with anyway. So, or genreify it in that way. And eventually I found a publisher, a small press whose mission is to publish work like this. And was very lucky to find the press. But
how'd you find them?
So it was my sort of maybe every few months scanning calls to submit. After being, I had a couple near misses in bigger presses, independent still, but a couple near misses where the manuscript made it to the editorial board, or, you know, but there just wasn't enough. And I think a big part of that is being a debut writer, so not having something of a working, you know, collection to back me. But so anyway, so some near misses with bigger presses, and I was doing this sort of last pass, and I was truly one of those situations where I was like, if these are all rejections, this is going in the drawer. And I'll say, you know, I'll write the book that makes me all the money, and then someone will want this niche weird book because it was like Loie's first book, right? Like that's what this thing will be. If this submission round doesn't work. And it was a small press, relatively young, at the time that I submitted. So it was only 2 or 3 seasons in to their publishing programming. And, you know, and maybe 2 months later, the editor-in-chief got back to me and wanted to publish it. And I said yes immediately. I mean, it's like, done, thank you. And all the better because she did not compromise my work. There was no like, this doesn't make sense, so we're gonna need to ditch the poems. Or, you know, that why can't we turn these script sections into dialogue? Well, let's just do that for clarity's sake. She didn't do any of that. So now the right people. This beast gets to just be a beast and be a monster and let it be out in the world. And again, hopefully just find a home even just for one reader. And I feel like I've been successful. And now just on to the next thing. I'm the second I got that acceptance, I was like, great, goodbye. Like you're done, on to the next project. It was a totally different project. So sort of even more proof that I'm not very consistent all the time, maybe. But
I love that mentality of, okay, I did that, what next?
Yeah.
That's not, that doesn't exist enough.
Seriously. And, yeah. Thank you.
I feel like once somebody has obtained some level of validation, they sort of stop to digest it, but then they have a hard time getting going again. And that in The War of Art, the book I mentioned earlier, he says, once you've done it, move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Because it'll be harder to get going again.
Well, he's absolutely right.
And I'm so stoked that you found people who respect what you were trying to do here and what you did.
Well, I'll tell you, and this is part of, and again, to my sort of interest in hybridity is such that I had a fiction mentor and someone that I gravitated to within my fiction program, but I also worked really closely with a poet in the department. And I took as many poetry classes as I did fiction classes. Like I did not sequester myself within any one genre. And then, you know, on the side was getting involved with other art forms and keeping that part of my brain lit. But I think I was able to accomplish that by actively saying, I am not just one thing.
Yeah.
You know, and then they were like, cool, so you get to be with me and me and me and me, and let's have some fun. And not many people did that even within my program. I will say that was a sort of accidental choice that I made, that ended up working out beautifully. So
Yeah, and well, you seem to understand that. You clearly understand that dabbling in a little bit of everything helps in the greater scheme of things. What you're trying to do overall.
hope so. I don't
I
know.
mean,
Sometimes I wonder, but
no, I think it does because the best writers um, that I remember were the ones who also, maybe they took a poetry workshop one term, even though they were enrolled in fiction, or maybe they took a creative nonfiction workshop, the next, even though they're enrolled in poetry. Um,
yeah.
the dabblers tended to be the writers I appreciated more.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good to hear. That's affirming, at least. There is a point where we all have to hunker down and say, this is what I'm doing, and and just finish it, like we were talking about earlier. You just got to get it done. You get something on the page, and this first novel taught me that I could do that, and so the next manuscript is twice as long at this point. At this stage of draft, it's twice as long. And there's no poetry or anything. We're not talking, it's like a real book. And I'm looking at this printed out thing and I'm like, holy shit, look what I did. Like, that's amazing that I got that out. But really would never have gotten there, if someone hadn't said to me, like, I think you're writing a novel, so go write the novel.
Yeah.
In whatever way you need to, write the novel. And suddenly the prospect of being a novelist became a thing on my radar. And maybe that's it, that I approached it almost accidentally, instead of starting out saying, I want to write a novel, I want to be a novelist. That would have hindered me. I think I would have maybe been paralyzed by that idea of like, well, what if the novel isn't what it needs to be? Therefore, I can't get it out. Instead, it was sort of just like, tripping into a dark room and not knowing where I was until the light got turned on. So that's cool. I wish it could happen every time I work on something, but yeah, not every time. How often do you get back to the Bay?
So I have a complicated relationship with my parents now, so not
Okay.
really. I mean, my last civil conversation with my mom was in 2016.
Oh,
And then
wow.
after Trump got elected, it stopped being civil.
I gather. Yep.
And then also there was like, I wrote this like 5-page open letter in verse, kind of, I was so pissed about Dana's suicide
Mm.
because not only that nobody noticed issues, but also
Yep.
that I found out through a Google alert a year later. Nobody bothered to reach out. And
Oh,
so
no,
I
Eric. I'm
wrote this
so
piece
sorry.
about kind of communication or a lack of communication, and that I think I burned a lot of people with it because
Mm.
I read it publicly at like events,
Yep.
campus events and things like that.
Good for you.
And but my sister loved it. It actually helped enhance my relationship with my sister quite a bit.
Okay.
And Yeah, I mean, I don't go back. I think the last time I was on the ferry, Jan and I just took the ferry out to Cliff Island
Mm-hmm.
because she basically was like, "This island is much more beautiful than the island you're from." I'm like, "I know, but it
Oh,
would have been miserable growing up there because I just wanted to be in a city. Like,
right.
I only ever wanted to be in a city, and so." Um, but aesthetically, she recognized, and so I've always said, well, if I ever made a movie on Casco Bay, it would either be made on Cliff Island or Shebang Island,
Yeah.
just because they're just more aesthetically beautiful. But yeah, I don't go back. My sister and I, we drive halfway, so she'll drive down from Gorham, I'll drive up from New York, and we'll meet in like the Berkshires, and
That's great.
we'll do like brunch, and then we'll drive back, and it's like a day trip.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, my brothers are both in Maine. Will's on Cliff Island and he's at home now, which is part pandemic, situation. But
Actually, I
but
my
yeah.
score, the score to my film, is actually rooted in a song written by a Cliff Islander, and his name is Eric Anderson. Do you know him?
Yeah. Oh
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I've never personally met him, but I know the
Really?
song. Or like I know Jeff Cusack's version of the song. I'm like, I'd like to take the song and kind of break it down and have my musician root the score in the song and do
Oh,
like a new sort of female cover of it. And he's like, okay, cool. And so I've been like snail mailing him uh, letters with links because I didn't have his email address. So I finally got his email address like a month ago,
oh
but
my
I've
God.
been snail mailing him like these long YouTube like links
Oh
to like
my
the
God.
trailer.
See, that still exists. Like this is our world, and we live in this other world. I love that.
Yeah.
That's so great. That's what I'm talking about. And it's Cliff Island's fault, obviously, but
Yeah,
um,
it's that's the it's so weird though that that's the island that I'm actually more connected with at this point. Like,
well, you and Jan should come out to Cliff.
yeah,
Come see us. We'll adopt you as
okay,
much as you may or may not want to be adopted. But um, I also have had that same instinct, right, for most of the time of just being like, I'm done with this place. I'm out of here. You've given me everything that you could possibly think to give me. So I'm to Boston, to New York, to Colorado, to Nashville. Um,
oh,
after
I
my kids
forgot
were
you were in Boston.
after for 3 years,
Yeah,
for 3 years before New York. And then after my kids were born, although it's not their fault, but I think I started to reconnect with the island and reconnect with Maine, or at least the coast, that sort of northeast coast, and craving the ocean, needing the water, hearing that sound in my head obsessively, and having it come out in my work in a way that was like, okay, I have to honor this somehow. I can't ignore it anymore. And because of the work that I cultivated, so mentoring and then teaching largely on the college schedule, I can work from Cliff Island, and we've been spending for the last few summers, like 4 to 6 weeks, hopefully longer someday soon, but bringing the kids up with me, um, and I work from Cliff in the summer months. And then Ben just pops in and out depending on tour schedules and things. So that's been really working well. And I get my fix.
yeah.
I get something that will sustain me wherever I may end up for the rest of the year. But my mom's still there, and, in some ways, nothing's changed, which I find comforting in moments such as these for now, you know.
Yeah, I've been trying to kind of find a way to have a foot in the city and a foot in New England. I haven't quite nailed that down yet, but I think I'm gonna have to wait till after the pandemic's over to figure out what my life will look like. But
Yeah,
yeah, I'd like to straddle sort of the
it
coast and the
could,
city.
I think that this experience has taught a lot of us what we can do with the technology we have and ways that we can work. Um, and it was already going down that road, right? Like I worked from home anyway, by and large at this point, except for going elsewhere to teach, but like, or residencies and the like. But I think that in this darkness, there's a lot of opportunity and ways that we can learn how to live more sustainably and but also hopefully just finding ways to access a more fulfilling life, to say like, why can't I do X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to find a way to make that work now, um, because really, what do we have to lose at this point? This
I
kind
think
of
yeah, that's a good thesis to end this episode on.
yeah. Okay,
I'm always looking for the high point. Um,
grab it when
so
you can. All right, like
yeah,
it's going to be a long week, and it's only Monday, so let's enjoy.
I
I'm
know. Well,
really enjoying this moment.
yeah, this is a great way to start off the week. I love these are my favorite types of conversations, which is the reason I started the podcast.
It's excellent.
to hack other creators' brains. And
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on. I hope you come on again.
Yeah, anytime.
Whether you have a book or not. Yeah.
Well, hopefully I have a book. That's
Well,
the goal.
you also you have a lot of short subjects pieces in journals and online journals, and
Yeah.
anytime a new one goes out, we'll do one.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, yeah. Hopefully more soon. I think the problem of getting stuck obsessed with the novel form means I have less and less coming out, you know, streaming actively out in the world. But hopefully there will be more coming soon, into the spring and summer. So
Wonderful.
yeah, I'll keep you posted. Hey,
Right,
say
thanks.
hi to Jan for me, okay?
Oh, definitely. She says she already said to say hi, so hi.
Yeah. Give her my love, and you know, whatever New York is, enjoy it as much as you can. For me, I do miss it.
Oh, I've taken advantage. Like I've been going on city bike rides in the middle of the avenues.
It must
just
be such a
going
trip,
straight
right?
down the canyons. Like, oh my God, like
Good.
once in a lifetime.
I know. What a weird, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
super
love
weird.
thinking about it. I don't know how I would feel if I were doing it, but like it's its own world, right? It's its own world of
Yeah.
fiction, maybe. Oh, very cool. Well, keep writing, share some stuff with me if you want. I'd love to see what you're working on. Send me whatever.
Yeah, okay. All right. Bye.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. Bye.
Thank you.